Hi, it's Tara Tillman of Westchester Realty, and today I'll be presenting part 3 of Mastering BPOs. I'll be joined by appraiser Michael Dolan of Shanna Jackson Appraisals. This is a step-by-step guide to how to complete a BPO from start to finish. I'm very excited about getting started, so here we go. So to get started, I wanted to give you a brief overview of what a BPO form looks like and contains. This is a general idea as there may be more complex BPOs or less complex BPOs, but generally this is information that you're going to find on a BPO form. So let's start at the very top. Simple information, the property address, the subject property address, the date that you're completing the BPO, your name as the agent, your company's name, email address. In the general marketing conditions, they're simply asking about what the conditions are currently in the market. Is it depressed, slow, stable, improving, or excellent? Employment conditions, are they declining, stable, or increasing? Now, estimated percentage of owners versus tenants in the neighborhood. They want to know, are there majority owners in the neighborhood? Versus renters, and you can find this out by going in the MLS, and you can get that information by pulling reports. The other thing would be they're asking about the supply. Is there normal supply of properties on the market, an oversupply, or a shortage of comparable listings in the neighborhood? You'll know this when you start doing a search because you'll see whether there are properties there available for you to choose from. Now, what are the number of competing listings in the neighborhood? Meaning, how many properties are on the market in that particular neighborhood? And what are the primary market trends? Are there REO short sales? Yes or no? And what just general market condition comments? You'll want to add that as well.
My name is Michael Dolan. I'm a certified residential appraiser. After the 2008 global financial crisis, I dove really, really deep into REO. So I've specialized in that segment for a very long time. I do a lot of relocation work, which is a very specified type of appraising. Okay. This 1004 MC is a market conditions analysis tool that, if it's done properly, if it's applied properly, is a good tool when we're doing market conditions as agents. When you guys are doing market conditions, if you're looking at what the MLS is putting out, those are much broader spectrum market conditions and don't necessarily reflect what's happening in the particular market segment for the subject property that you're looking at. So if you're trying to do a BPO on a particular property, you want the market conditions associated with other similar properties. Most MLS systems have got this tool available now. I would expect probably all MLS systems have the tool available. Your active listings, pending sales, and contingents, you run this report. The example that I gave you here is from the Charleston MLS system. What this report tells you, if you look at it, the grid is broken down into going back from the date that you run the report. It goes back 12 months because that's the relevance of the data. So the first column there is the first half of the year preceding the effective date that you're running it. So if you're running it today, that's the first half of the year, the prior year. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. The second column is the third quarter of the preceding year, and the last column is the present quarter up to the date on the report. So for instance, when I ran this report, it's based on today's date, so it goes back 12 months. Okay. So if you look at the report, if you look at the top field in the report, like running across the column, you can see in the first half of the year, there were 33 sales. In the third quarter, there were 20 sales. In the fourth quarter, there were 9 sales. So looking at that trend, you can see that the volume of sales has dropped. So then you can say, okay, the market is slowing based on that.
Yes.
The third line down is your number of active listings. So you can look at that and you can say, what is your available inventory under the current conditions? And that determines how quickly the market is moving and how much supply is left in the market, whether you've got a shortage, whether you've got a surplus, or whether everything is in balance. And by looking at that fourth line down to see how many months of available inventory is left based on how many sales took place in the quarter and based on the available inventory. So if you had $760,000 in the third quarter minus $660,000 fourth quarter, that's $100,000 variant. You divide that 100,000 by the larger number. So the larger number in this example is 760. So you divide it by $760,000, which brings you to a market change of 13% over that 6-month window. You divide it by the 6 months and you come up with a 2.2% approximate month over month changing market condition. And in that example, that would be a declining rate. If it was reversed, it would be an increasing rate. And you can do that pretty much in any market segment. And this would be specific to whatever your search parameters are. Does that math make sense?
It makes perfect sense, yes.
So this is a good way to be able to say not only what the general trend is in the market, but also to be able to identify the rate of increase or decline if one is existent. And right now, because there are a lot of indicators lending in the direction that probably we're going to come into a declining market trend in the relative near term, this is a very important tool to be able to look at and also apply mathematically so that you can do forecasting as a predictive forecast.
And that, I mean, I think that's wonderful in terms of offering BPOs, but also just in your business to be able to forecast what is actually happening in the market so that we kind of can shift and make adjustments to our business model in order to compensate for those factors.
The competitive closed sale section of the BPO form is asking about the subject property in comparison to closed sales. They want to know about the proximity of the subject. What did the property sell for? The price per gross living area, the date of the sale, days on market, value adjustments, sales or financing concessions, location, is the property in a city or rural area? Is it leasehold or fee simple? The lot size, view, design, and appeal, the quality of construction, what year was the property built? What is the condition of the property? What are the above grade room counts and gross living area? Does the property have a basement? Is it finished? Are there rooms below grade? Functional utility, heat and cooling, energy efficient items. Does the property have a garage or a carport? Is there a porch, a patio, a deck, or a fireplace? Does the property have a fence or a pool, etc.?
So when you go in as an agent or anybody else that's an agent is going in to try to do like a CMA or start preparing for your BPO, you go into the MLS system and establish your search parameters that would narrow down the range of properties that you'd be looking for, right? So
that's right.
In the appraisal process, generally the way that I start is looking at, say, the square footage. So I may go 500 square feet plus or minus. So if it's a 2,000 square foot house, I may say I'm going to look at everything from 1,500 to 2,500, because once you get outside of a certain spectrum, it becomes it falls into a different appeal zone. So you establish your parameters based on age, based on square footage, based on geographic radius, or any other attributes that you're doing. If you're going to do bathrooms, if you're going to do bedrooms, anything like that. Once you establish those parameters, and then you go in there and you select what would represent the most suitable substitutes for the property that you're trying to put a relative number on.
How do you handle your adjustments for closed sales? Right. Because I can do the average of that price per square foot. Now, in terms of adjustments, I've talked to appraisers in the past and received a list of, things that might be adjusted for, garage space, those kinds of things, right? So how do you handle adjustments? Do you actually do price-based adjustments based on whether the property has I mean, a square footage we can easily figure out because we're going to just, add or subtract based on average price per square foot. But when you're talking about things like the property has a 2-car garage versus a 1-car garage, the property has a swimming pool, the property doesn't have a swimming pool, those kinds of additional factors, how do you handle those?
Okay, so first of all, looking at the grid that is on your BPO form here, when you're making your adjustments, you always want to adjust your comps that you're using to adjust them to bring them in line with the subject property that you're looking at. So if the comp inferior in whatever attribute, you want to adjust up. If it's superior in whatever attribute, you make the adjustment negative to bring it subject. I know that's simplistic, but
no, that's perfect.
Something that I see overlooked often are sales concessions. Sales concessions are an important consideration because they're not usually when I do a sales concession adjustment, it's usually a dollar for dollar adjustment. It's not always, but usually. And it's not always applied. Sometimes it's appropriate and sometimes it's not. But if there's especially if there's a large sales concession adjustment, if somebody puts on a $250,000 house, a $10,000 or $15,000 concession, then it does have an impact on the typical buyer's psyche and should be adjusted down to remove that from whatever the sale price is. So looking at concessions is important. A locational appeal, especially in the markets that I work, coastally, flood zones are very prevalent, and flood zones, because of the requisite flood insurance, typically do impact the purchaser, and so usually are looked at as a negative if a property is in a flood zone. If you're comparing it against properties that are not in flood zones, then it's usually considered like a negative for the for the typical buyer, because they have to bring more money month over month over month to pay for that requisite flood insurance. And so factoring flood insurance, factoring busy roads, commercial influences that are in proximity to the subject property, those are things that should be looked at. Square footage adjustments. The way that I do square footage adjustments is, if say I have 5 sales that are in the report, I do the average price per square foot. I take the average price per square foot by averaging all 5 of those, and then I start somewhere. I usually go 25 to 50% of whatever the average price per square foot is. So if the average price per square foot is $100, then my adjustment is going to the adjustment in the grid is going to land somewhere between $25 and $50. It's never going to be over 50%.
Okay.
So keep it at or below that 50% margin when you're doing those adjustments, because you don't want your adjustments to be statistically skewed in one direction or another. They can't be too high and they can't be too low. When you get into your quality condition adjustments, is based on percentage of the price range that I'm working in. So it can be exact or it can be approximate. A quality adjustment, a 5% if I'm doing a condition adjustment, and that's 5% of the estimate of value. For basic amenities, I'll go 1.25%. For superior amenities, I'll go 2.5%. So to explain that, if you're comparing a porch to a stoop or a garage to a carport, usually the better amenity, the one that commands more market appeal, a porch versus a stoop, I'll give a porch 2.5%. I'll give the stoop 1.25%. With larger, more impacting amenities like an in-ground swimming pool, I'll usually start at 5% and we'll go up potentially to 10%, not usually above 10%.
How do you handle as repaired?
In the HUD REO world, when I'm doing these, I'll go in and say, okay, if we've got a deficiency with carpet that needs to be replaced, I'll replace like with like, and go at a lower level of cost. You don't want to go with like the most expensive pieces or whatever. So as I'm going through my process, as the appraisers are going through the process, we actually put together a cost to remediate everything. And so what I do is I'll look at it and I'll say, okay, estimated, if we have to replace a roof, if we've got to replace an HVAC system, if we've got a plumbing deficiency, estimate all of those costs, any of the cosmetics, and then I have a bottom line number estimate. And you can do that pretty quickly. Just run through and say, looking at the major factors, try to break it down, and then look at what that number is and compare that number to whatever your condition adjustment is in the grid that you've produced. And if it's relatively close, then you can just add whatever your condition adjustment is back into whatever your estimate of value as is, and that will give you your as repaired value.
I would assume that it will be sort of the same if we're also given a list of repairs that are going to be made.
Because if they're going to give you a list of repairs that are going to be made, usually that spec sheet is going to give you more detail about what specific types of attributes. So if somebody is going in an REO capacity, depending on the market segment that you're working in, usually you're going to go, like, if you're going to replace countertops, it's going to be with similar type countertops for the market area that you're working in. So if it's going to be replaced with laminate countertops or basic builder grade cabinets or basic vanities or carpet and linoleum flooring or whatever it's going to be, if you get a spec sheet from a builder that comes in and says, we're replacing it with, the countertops are going to be quartz, the flooring is going to be LVP or true hardwood, we're going to do, instead of fiberglass shower enclosures, we're going to do tile enclosures, something like that. That gives you more of a perspective, so you're working in a higher price point. So you build that higher price point into whatever your as repaired value is going to be. Because ideally what you want to do is have a context on the property as it sits today, but then also visualize what it's going to be once it's repaired. In an REO capacity, you're basically just bringing the property back up to a base level for the neighborhood and habitability. You're not bringing it into like capital improvements. You're not basically renovating the kitchen. You're just bringing it back to the base level. You're not renovating flooring. You're not upgrading flooring. You're bringing it back to the base level. If you've got a deficient roof that's actively leaking, then you're just bringing it back to not leaking.
Find properties that are in the same condition so that you don't have to do a lot of adjustments, making sure you match like for like.
That's correct. And in the current market, one of the challenges that we have right now, because there's been such a lag on REO inventory actually coming live, and a lot of the properties now, when I'm seeing REO today, most of the properties that I'm seeing have been in a state of disrepair for such a long time. It's really extreme circumstances. Ceilings falling in, very, very deficient, mold, and it's very hard to find competing properties until more of those properties cycle in. So if you can't find a competing property when you're looking at something like that, what you want to do is have a pretty good qualified basis for what your cost to remediate is going to be. And then from there, you can take that cost, build a premium onto it. So if you're estimating that it's going to cost $25,000 to bring the property back to a level of basic habitability, you don't want to do in these types of adjustments dollar for dollar. You want to go, what is your dollar for dollar cost? And then add onto that whatever that is. If it's another, 5%, 2.5%, whatever, the typical consumer that's coming in, your target market is going to be your investor, and your investor is going to want to buy at a deeper discount. So you have to factor that psyche into those adjustments and when you're making that application.
Overall, we have fewer properties on the market. When I think about doing a BPO, the very first thing I think about is, can I find all my comps in the neighborhood? Okay, so if I can't find them all in the neighborhood, then I go to the zip code. If I can't find them in the zip code, then I go to the county. If I can't find them in the county, then, oh my gosh, I'm looking at adjacent counties. Is that the same approach that you take in terms of being able to find enough comps when you're in a market where there aren't a lot?
So if you're in a particular area that you can't find something that is reflective of your subject property, but you can cross into a different county, a different subdivision, whatever, you just want to make sure that whatever you're going into, that the area that you're going into carries a similar market appeal, that the consumer that would be interested in buying where you are, or a similar consumer would be interested in buying in the competing market. So it's really just focusing on the target demographic. At mobile homes is a good example, because a lot of times they come, if they're not in a consolidated community, a lot of times they come on acreage, a lot of times they're in more rural pockets, and a lot of times there just aren't competing mobile homes in the immediate vicinity. So when I'm doing a mobile home search, I may have to go 20, 25 miles, 15, 20, 25 miles in order to search them. I cross county lines, but the target purchaser in that regard is generally looking for something that's a little bit more secluded, is generally looking in the mobile home segment, is generally looking for acreage. And so you can expand your search parameter radius out much, much further in that regard and defend that and justify it. Because if somebody is looking for acreage, if they're looking in a particular market segment, just as long as you're identifying a similar market segment, is this a good substitute property for that? And understanding the market that you're looking in and you're comparing to.
You need to provide an explanation when you have to go beyond what radius.
I generally want to keep it within certainly less than a quarter-mile radius if possible. Maybe a half-mile. If you start getting outside of that, you have to defend it. So if you're in a more of an urban center, you want a much narrower radius. 1 mile if you're in a relative urban center, 5 miles if you're suburban. Ideally, if you're working in a cookie cutter subdivision, that's the perfect ideal scenario, because then you can pull everything out of there. Hopefully you've got enough of a representative sampling of properties that would be similar enough to be able to support it. But
maybe the property was built before the neighborhood, and then the neighborhood came in, and this is a 5,000 square foot house, and the typical homes in that neighborhood are 2,500. How would you handle that?
Finding other properties that are representative of that property as best you can, expanding out. Usually put in 1 or 2 from the immediate proximity and then adjust accordingly, just to show that it's market acceptable. And if you're in a pocket that's got external features, somebody may put in a really ornate and nice exterior kitchen because they like to entertain, and they've got an in-ground pool, and they do all this stuff, and they may put $25,000, $35,000, $45,000 into a kitchen that's atypical for the market. It becomes a market appeal factor, but the typical buyer won't typically come in and say, I'm going to pay for that if it's unusual for the area. We see a lot of garage conversions, for example. Sometimes they're permitted, more often than not, they're unpermitted. And sometimes the market accepts them. Sometimes they're considered a super adequacy, where the market doesn't pay for the added square footage and the benefit of it. And it almost functions as a detriment because garages may be prevalent in the particular subsection, and the typical buyer would want a garage versus the conversion. See if you can find other properties with that similar attribute. And that provides the market-based evidence to prove that it is an acceptable feature, that it's something that actually is accepted by the market. And then you can price it accordingly based on the differential once you do all of your other adjustments.
In line with that, I had a client who had a property that was a ranch, but it had a basement on the bottom. She did not permit that basement space, but made it heated, cooled, and totally renovated it. And then she wanted me to put it on the market for double the square footage. And so when I went to do comps on it, I really was uncomfortable because I felt like because we had not permitted that square footage, then were the next buyers going to have a problem trying to sell at that square footage? And you see that, it's being taxed on this amount. These are the amount of bedrooms it's supposed to have. It actually has more bedrooms than it's perked for. How do you handle that?
First, if there's anything in the property that's not permitted, then it should not be calculated into the square footage, period. An unpermitted attic, an unpermitted garage that are above grade, they should be handled as a separate line item. So like in your grid, what I'll do is I'll say unpermitted rec room, unpermitted whatever the space is, if it's not been permitted. If it's done in a workmanlike manner and it's comparable to the rest of the dwelling, you can give it the equivalent consideration as if it was part of the square footage, but it should never be added into the square footage when you're calculating whatever that number is. Anything that's below grade if you're dealing with a basement, if you're dealing specifically with single family homes, finished or unfinished should never be included in the square footage. It shouldn't be included in the room count or the square footage. So if you've got a home that's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath above grade, and you've got a basement that's finished and it's got a bedroom and 1 bath down there, you shouldn't add that bedroom and bathroom back into your total room count, because that falls into a different value contribution section of your analysis.
How do you consider that?
Comp it as though it is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home. And then, especially if you're dealing with a basement, ideally with a basement, what you want to look for is whatever is above grade, that's considered your legal qualified gross living area. And so when you're doing those room counts, you want to comp it according to that, and then look for other properties that have finished basements, hopefully similar finished basements. If it's a unfinished basement, then you adjust it accordingly to bring it as though it were finished. But you want to do those as 2 separate analytical considerations in your grid. Whatever is above grade, that's your gross living area, that's your room count. Permitting does not make a property illegal if it's unpermitted. The only thing that would make it illegal is if the conversion would constitute a violation of the current zoning.
Is there anything else that you can think of that we did not cover that would be important to know?
Just make sure you're looking at those percentages and saying, does this seem like it falls inside? If you take a number and it seems like it's a really big number, look at what that would mean in terms of the percentage of the sale price. $600,000 home and you're doing a $15,000 adjustment, what does that mean in a percentage? And as long as it falls inside of that 5% or less spectrum, but over 1%, that's your sweet zone, generally speaking. The only other thing that jumped out at me on your form, and this is with the HUD REO, the 30-day as is price. As appraisers, one thing that I would love to see more improvement on is the quality of the information put into the MLS system, because we rely on the quality of the data that agents put into the MLS system. This is the nature of the analytics. And so if the information is inaccurate or incomplete or not good representative, it makes the analysis much more difficult. Thinking from the perspective of a BPO, as you go in and are trying to identify other properties that would represent suitable substitutes to help you narrow your focus and to determine what the value of the property should be, if an agent hasn't put photo evidence in there so that you can conceptualize what the property looks like, if the agent hasn't put a description in there, if they inaccurately report room counts or square footages because they're conflating permitted with unpermitted or basements with above grade or whatever, all of that stuff has a negative impact on the process at large. So the better quality information that you put in upfront really helps the industry in a general context. And when I'm saying the industry, I'm talking real estate in general in totality, that's from mortgage finance to selling the properties and all in between, including appraising.
Well, you know what? I'm really glad you brought that up, because then that helps us to understand our part or the important part that we play in making sure that values are accurately represented. So thank you for that. And that's something that we can definitely work on. And that is to be a little more diligent, put a little more information in the MLS to be able to make your job easier and our jobs easier when we're trying to provide BPO. So I want to thank you. Thank you so very much for coming and talking to us. If anybody wants to get in touch with you because they are working with someone who is divorced and may need an appraisal, or someone who is trying to get PMI removed from their property, how can they contact you?
Email address is sjackson appraising, and that's SJACKSONAPPRAISING and my primary phone number is 404-317-4197. And if anybody has any, I'm always open. I'm happy to. I give a lot of feedback to people all the time. People call me with questions, and I'm happy to help.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed part 3 of Mastering BPOs and that you can use this tool to increase your income, supplement your income, or to just bring more information to your buyers and sellers. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this information with someone who might find it beneficial. And again, thank you so very much for joining this training. I'm Tara Tillman of Westchester Realty.